Here is a list. Stay with me, because the list is the story. The middle school, the high school, including the athletics wing and the room where they keep the standardized tests, the public library, the water treatment plant on River Road, the county courthouse, 3 of its 4 floors, not the 4th, the evidence annex behind the courthouse, which is a separate contract, the impound lot, 41 businesses on Front Street, the hospital's north wing, the pharmacy corridor, and every medroom on every floor, the Methodist church, 2 banks, the gun shop, and, because he had done the work at cost after the flood, the fire station. One man in a town of 11,000 people could open every one of those doors, legally, at 2 in the morning, with keys he cut himself, and nobody in that town lost a minute of sleep over it. That is not a security failure. That is what a locksmith is. A town hands one person the whole map of itself, and it works, and it has worked in 10,000 towns for 200 years, because of a thing we almost never name out loud. It works because that person decided it would. I'm Nathan. There is a number in this story that everyone gets wrong, including the man who used it as a threat, and you are going to hear it in about 11 minutes. When you do not do what he did. Do not assume you know what it counts. Because the story people tell about Lachlan Pryor is that a man with a body count came out of retirement. That is not what happened. What happened is worse for the people it happened to, and better for everybody else. And it turns entirely on the difference between a man who can get into a room and a man who can get somebody out of one. Nickel Bend, Ohio, sits in a bend of the Muskingum where the river makes a lazy left and the town crowds up against it like it's leaning over to look. 11,000 people. A glass plant that closed in 2006 and a plastics plant that didn't. 4 bars, 3 churches, 1 high school with a football program the town takes more seriously than it will admit in mixed company. Pryor Lock and Safe sat on Front Street between a florist and a place that sold vacuum parts, and the sign over the door had a brass key on it that Lachlan Pryor's predecessor had painted in 1971 and that Lachlan repainted every 3rd spring in the same colors because the town would have noticed if he hadn't. He was 47, 6 foot even, going gray at the temples, quiet in the way that made new people think he was unfriendly, and old people know he wasn't. He wore a canvas apron with 11 pockets, and he could tell you what was in every one without looking. He had hands that had been broken and set at least twice, and he had a habit, when he was thinking, of turning a key over and over between his fingers like a man working a rosary. He was married to Lucinda, who was 44 and had worked the hospital pharmacy for 19 years, and who was the only person in Nickel Bend who could reliably make him laugh out loud in public. They had 1 child. Arlo was 12, played trombone badly, and chess unreasonably well, had his mother's mouth and his father's stillness, and had gotten it into his head that year that he was going to be a marine biologist in a state with no coastline. Lachlan's whole business ran on a thing he called the book. The book was not a book. It was a fireproof cabinet in the back of the shop with 4 drawers, and in those drawers, on index cards, in his own handwriting, was the keying schedule of most of Nickel Bend. Every master, every submaster, every change key, every cylinder, every rekey, with the date it was done and the name of the person who authorized it. Cyril Dunmore had started it in 1968 and had handed it to Lachlan in 2011 along with the shop and a piece of advice that Lachlan repeated to exactly 1 person ever. Cyril said, "A lock is a promise, and you're not the one who makes it. You're the one who keeps it." There is a thing people believe about locks that is wrong, and it matters here. People believe a lock stops somebody. It does not. A lock has never stopped anybody in the history of the world. A lock is a delay, measured in seconds. And to a person who knows what they're doing, a residential deadbolt is maybe 40 seconds, and a common commercial mortise is less than that. What a lock actually does is make entry, take time, and leave evidence. And those 2 things together are the entire architecture of trust that a town like Nickel Bend stands on. Lachlan knew this the way a doctor knows what a body can survive. It was not cynicism, it was the opposite. He had spent his working life in places where nobody had that architecture at all, and he had come home and picked the trade that built it, on purpose, and if you had asked him why, he would have changed the subject. He also owned, and this becomes the whole story, a machine. It sat in a pelican case under the bench, and it cost $11,400, and it was a manufacturer-level automotive key programmer with a subscription that had to be renewed annually against a personal locksmith license, a state registration number, a set of biometrics, and a background check that got rerun every year. The device logged. Every single time it talked to a vehicle, it wrote a line: date, time, VIN, operation, and the licensee credential it was operating under. In 3 counties, exactly 4 people were licensed to own one. Lachlan Pryor was one of them. That machine could stand at the driver's door of almost any car built after 2010 and, in about 11 minutes, teach that car to accept a key it had never met. It was, in a very literal sense, the most dangerous object in Nickel Bend, and it lived under a bench in a shop with a bell over the door. And every year Lachlan filled out a 4-page form swearing that he alone controlled it. He believed that. It was, by August of that year, not true, and had not been true for 14 months. The last thing you need about the setup is Sonny. Sonny Vantassel was Lucinda's younger brother, 39, and he was one of those men who has never in his life been in a room he wasn't trying to be the most impressive person in. He had a laugh that started too early. He always paid for dinner and always mentioned it. He'd had 8 jobs in 12 years, and every one of them had ended because of somebody else. And if you sat and listened to all 8 stories, you would notice that the somebody else was never the same person twice, and Sonny never noticed that at all. He had a daughter in Columbus he saw 4 times a year, and a truck he could not afford. And he had, at some point, decided that Lachlan Pryor, who had never once bragged about anything, who fixed the church's doors for free, whom the whole town called Lock, was a man getting away with something. That is the part that everybody who tells this story leaves out. Sonny did not do what he did because he hated Lachlan. He did it because he could not stand that Lachlan was quietly good at one thing, in a town that liked him for it, and that nothing Sonny had ever done had produced that. Lucinda had been carrying her brother since she was 19. Rides, rent, a co-signed loan in 2019. Thanksgiving every year. A bed in the basement for the 11 weeks in 2022, when he had nowhere. Lachlan had never once objected out loud, and that restraint, that specific, 20-year, teeth-together restraint, is a thing you should hold on to, because it is the reason the second half of this story goes the way it goes. To understand the number, you have to understand what Lachlan Pryor actually did for 18 years, and almost nobody in Nickel Bend did, including his wife until 2016. He enlisted at 19, and by 24 he had been selected into a unit whose name does not appear on anything, and whose entire function is one sentence: go get the person and bring them back alive. Not raids, not assaults, recovery, hostages, mostly, contractors, aid staff, journalists, the occasional citizen who had wandered into something, plus a category the paperwork called sensitive personnel, which meant somebody whose capture was, itself, a national problem. His teams went into places where the local authority was a rumor, and they came out carrying people. The trade of that job is not shooting. Shooting is what happens when the job has already partly failed. The trade is access. How do you get into a structure, quickly, without announcing yourself, and get back out with somebody who is injured, terrified, and does not want to be touched? That is doors. That is hinges. That is which way a padlock's shackle faces, and what a hasp is bolted through, and what happens to a steel roll-up when you cut the wrong side. That is knowing that 90% of the doors in the world are held by something the doorframe is not strong enough to justify. Lachlan Pryor spent his 20s and 30s becoming the best doorman in a small, strange profession, and when he came home at 37 with a spine that had been fused in 2 places, he did the only thing that made sense to him, which was to keep working on doors, and to spend the rest of his life on the other side of the question. Now, the number, 318. That number lived in a folder, in a bank box, in Zanesville, and it appeared on a single page of an award citation packet that Lachlan had never framed and never shown anybody. And what it counted, this is the whole hinge of the story, was people recovered. 318 human beings walked out of somewhere because his teams went in. 61 of them were children. The citation, Being a military document, phrased it in the compressed language of military documents. It said, "Personnel recovered, 318. And in that same packet, 3 pages later, there was a separate, smaller, much uglier line about direct action, and that number was 3. 3. In 18 years. Because if you are doing recovery well, you almost never fire, and every time you do it means something upstream of you failed." Sonny Vantassel saw that folder in the summer of 2023, when Lucinda had him at the house helping to move a water heater, and he went through his sister's closet while she was at the store, because that is who he was. He read the packet the way a certain kind of man reads anything. Fast, for the part that makes a good story at a bar. He saw a shadowy unit. He saw a redacted country. He saw the number 318. And Sonny Vantassel, who had never in his life been asked to be brave about anything, walked out of that house having decided that his brother-in-law was a killer with 318 notches, and he was, for the next 14 months, quietly thrilled about it. He told people, not everybody, and never in front of Lucinda, but at the Anchor on a Friday, 4 beers in, to men he wanted to impress, he would lean in and say, "You know what my brother-in-law is, right?" 2 of the men he told that to worked for Milton Kessick. That is how it started. Not with the debt. The debt came later. It started because a small man wanted to borrow the weight of a big one and did not understand a single thing about what he was holding. Lachlan found out about the bragging in the fall of 2024 from Cyril Dunmore, who was 81 and still came into the shop 3 mornings a week to drink coffee and complain about how nobody carried decent pin kits anymore. Cyril had heard it from his nephew. "Your wife's brother," Cyril said, "is telling people you killed 300 men." Lachlan was at the bench, cutting a key. He didn't stop. He finished the cut, deburred it, held it up to the light, and set it down. He shouldn't do that. "That's what you've got? Cyril, if I go over there and make a thing out of it, then it's a thing. If I don't, it's Sonny talking." Cyril looked at him a while. Then he said the sentence that Lachlan thought about, later, every day for about 6 months. "Son, the trouble with letting a lie sit is that somebody eventually builds on it." And someone did. Milton Kessick was 58 and owned Kessick Auto Salvage and Towing out on Route 60, which had a rotating agreement with 2 police departments, 4 insurance carriers, and about a dozen body shops. It was a good business. Kessick had been running it since 1994. He had a wife, a boat, a pew at the Methodist Church, and about $4 million in equity in a company that had never made $4 million. The difference was a thing his people called the pull. Here is how it worked, and it is worth understanding because everything after this is a consequence of it. A modern car cannot be hot-wired. Anybody telling you otherwise is describing 1994. A modern car will not turn over unless it receives a coded challenge and response from a transponder chip it has been taught to accept. So the entire economics of vehicle theft moved, over about 15 years, from a physical problem to a credentialing problem. You don't break into the car anymore. You get the car to add you. And the only tools that can do that legitimately are held by a very small number of licensed people. And the manufacturers know exactly who they are, because the tools phone home. Kessick's crew had a device. It was Lachlan Pryor's device. Or rather, it was the credential inside Lachlan Pryor's device, cloned onto a second box by a man in Michigan who charged $9,000 for the service and asked nothing. They got the credential in June of 2024. They got it because Sonny Vantassel spent an afternoon at the shop helping out while Lachlan drove to Marietta for a job, and he photographed 4 things: a licensing certificate on the wall, a state registration card in a drawer, the serial plate on the Pelican case, and a page of the annual renewal form with Lachlan's handwriting on it. He was paid $4,000. He would say, later, that he thought they wanted it for parts. For 14 months, cars were taken all over that part of Ohio, and every single one of them, in the manufacturer's own back-end log, was opened and rekeyed by a licensed locksmith named Lachlan Pryor of Nickel Bend, license number 4110973. The first sign was so small that Lachlan almost let it go, and the fact that he didn't is the reason anybody is alive at the end of this. In March, a claims investigator named Cassia Boulanger called the shop. She was 36, worked for a carrier out of Cincinnati, and had the flattest phone manner of any human being Lachlan had ever spoken to. She asked whether he had performed an all-keys lost service on a 2022 pickup in Coshocton on the 9th of February. He said no. She said, without any particular emphasis, that his credential had. He asked her to repeat it. She did. He asked her to send him the log line. She said she couldn't. He asked what she could send him, and she thought about it for 4 or 5 seconds, and said she could tell him a number, and the number was 19. 19 vehicles, over 14 months, in 5 counties, all showing the same licensee. Lachlan Pryor stood in his own shop with the phone against his ear and looked at the Pelican case under the bench, and did a thing that he had trained thousands of hours to do and had not needed to do in 10 years, which is, he stopped, and he did not react, and he catalogued. He said, "Ms. Boulanger, are you calling me because you think I did it, or because you think I didn't?" She said, "I'm calling you because if you did it, you're the stupidest thief I've ever worked, and if you didn't, you're about 8 weeks from being arrested, and I'd rather have your paperwork before that than after." They became, over the following months, something like allies, in the specific way that 2 careful people become allies. What Lachlan did next was not dramatic, and it took 11 weeks. He pulled the device. He photographed the tamper seals, intact. He photographed the serial plate. He drove to Michigan and sat in a diner across from a man who would not admit to anything but who, when Lachlan put a photograph of his own registration card on the table, went the color of a fish and asked him to leave. He pulled the book, his own book, and he built a second book. Every job, every date, every invoice, every credit card slip, matched against the manufacturer's log dates that Boulanger fed him in a slow drip through channels she probably should not have used. Of the 19, he could prove he was physically somewhere else for 14. 3 he could prove by fuel receipts. 2 he couldn't prove at all, and those 2 kept him awake. He did not tell Lucinda. That is his one real failure in this story, and he owns it. He did not tell her because on the 22nd of April he sat in his truck outside the shop for a long time and made himself finish the sentence he had been avoiding. And the finished sentence was, "The only people who had access to that room, that drawer, and that certificate are Cyril Dunmore, my wife, my son, and Sonny." And when he made himself put money on it, he did not hesitate. He knew. He knew. And he did not want to be the man who took her brother away from her on a suspicion. And so he did the thing that decent people do that gets them hurt. He decided he needed to be certain first. He got certain on the 19th of June. He drove out to Route 60 at 4 in the morning and parked in the tree line above Keswick Auto Salvage, and he lay in wet grass with a pair of binoculars for 2 hours and watched a crew of 5 put a stolen Silverado into a building that was not the shop building, and he wrote down what he saw in the same flat handwriting he used on index cards. The building was the old Nickel Bend printing plant. Keswick had bought it in 2016. It was 300 feet long, brick, with a sawtooth roof, a truck bay at the east end, and 11 exterior doors. Lachlan knew that building the way you know a house you grew up in. Because in 2013, when the printing company still existed, Pryor Lock and Safe had done the entire hardware package on it. Every cylinder, every closer, every panic bar, every one of the 11 doors, and Lachlan had cut the keys himself and had written every one of them onto index cards in his own hand and filed them in the cabinet at the back of his shop, and had never been asked, in 12 years, to change a single one. Keswick had never rekeyed it. Almost nobody ever does. That is the quiet, boring, enormous fact underneath this entire story. And it is the same fact that lets a locksmith in any town in America be dangerous. And the reason it almost never matters is that the locksmith is, almost always, a person like Lachlan Pryor. He drove home. He made breakfast. He drove Arlo to a chess thing in Zanesville and sat in a folding chair for 5 hours reading a paperback he did not read a word of. And that night he called Bishop Vance. Bishop was 52, ran a cold storage warehouse outside Wheeling, and had been the man on Lachlan's left in 4 countries. Their friendship had a particular quality. They did not talk for a year at a time, and then one of them would call, and the other one would say almost nothing, and do exactly what was needed. Lachlan told him all of it in about 6 minutes. Bishop was quiet for a while. Then he said, You've got a legal answer, and you've got the other one. What are you asking me for? The legal one. That's what I thought. A pause. You sure? I've got a wife and a 12-year-old, and a shop with my name on it, Bishop. I'm not going to be a story. All right, Bishop exhaled. Then here's what I'd do. Don't confront Sonny. The second he knows you know, he tells them, and then you're a problem they have to solve, instead of a name on a log. Build it clean, hand it to somebody with a badge who isn't from your town, and let it land. That's a year. That's a year, Bishop agreed. You got a year? And Lachlan Pryor said, probably, which was the only genuinely wrong thing he said in the entire summer. He did not get a year. He got 11 weeks. What ended it was not detective work, and it was not Keswick getting nervous. What ended it was Sonny Vantassel doing what Sonny Vantassel always did, which was to take something that was working and put his hand in it. Sonny had been paid $4,000 in June of 2024 for 4 photographs, and he had spent that in about 6 weeks, and then he had done the thing that always happens next. He asked for more, and Keswick's people, who were not stupid, gave him a small job instead of cash. Move a car, then another, then hold a set of plates, then take a truck to a lot in Steubenville, and come back on a bus. By that spring, Sonny was into the operation deep enough that he was moving 5 and 6 vehicles a month, and he was skimming. Not much. That's the thing. He was pulling parts. A catalytic converter here, a set of wheels there, an ECU, off cars before he delivered them, and selling them separately, and telling himself it was a bonus. Over about 9 months it came to a little over $214,000, and the reason it took 9 months to notice is that Keswick's inventory system was, ironically, the sloppiest part of a very tidy crime. Bellamy Roach noticed. Bell was 34 and ran the actual crew. 9 men, most of them under 30, working nights in the old printing plant. He had come up in Youngstown. He had been to prison once for something he genuinely hadn't done, which had made him permanently and specifically dangerous, and he had a habit of speaking very quietly to make people lean in. On the 11th of August, Bell put a spreadsheet in front of Sonny Vantassel and asked him one question. And Sonny, who had never in his life been able to hold still under pressure, talked for 11 straight minutes and confessed to all of it, including things they hadn't found. Keswick's rule for this was old and simple and had never once required violence, because everyone who worked for him had a family and a house and a life in a 100-mile radius, and that was the whole security system. The rule was, you work it off, and while you work it off, somebody holds something. They asked Sonny what he had. He had a truck he owed money on, a rented duplex, and an ex-wife in Columbus who wouldn't take his calls. And then he said, and I want to be precise here, because Sonny would later insist he was misheard, and 3 separate men testified he was not. He said, my sister's boy stays with me Thursdays. Here is the part that turns. Bell Roach did not want a child. Bell Roach had said, out loud, that he did not do that. What changed his mind was the second thing Sonny said, which was Sonny doing what he always did, borrowing weight he did not own. He said, and listen, the kid's dad, that's Lachlan Pryor. You want to talk about insurance? That man killed 318 people. Government paid him for it. Nobody's going to the cops. That family does not go to the cops. He meant it as a boast about his own connections. Bell Roach heard something entirely different. Bell Roach heard, the father is dangerous, so the father is exactly the person you need a hostage against. And that is how a lie a small man told in a bar to feel bigger came back around 14 months later and put his own nephew in a building. The 28th of August was a Thursday. Arlo Pryor got off the bus at 4:10 at the corner of 9th and Front, which he had done 200 times, and Sonny's truck was at the curb, which had also happened plenty of times, because Thursday was the day Sonny took him for a milkshake and then home at 6, an arrangement Lucinda had set up years ago, mostly so her brother would have something in his week. Arlo got in. There is a doorbell camera 2 houses down that has all of it, and the thing that gets people is that the kid is laughing when he pulls the door shut. At 6:15, Lucinda called Sonny. No answer. At 6:40, she called Lachlan at the shop and said, in a voice that was still normal, is Sonny with you? At 7:05, Lachlan Pryor stood in his kitchen and understood, in about 4 seconds, the shape of the entire thing. The credential, the 19 vehicles, the 2 he couldn't account for, his brother-in-law's mouth, and his son. At 7-Eleven, his phone rang. It was Sonny's number. Sonny was drunk, or performing drunk, and he was laughing. And it is important to understand that the laugh was fear. It was the laugh of a man standing in a room with people he is terrified of, trying to prove to them that he is on their side. He said, "Lock, hey, so there's a situation." Lachlan said nothing. He walked out of the kitchen so Lucinda would not hear, and he stood in the yard, and he put the phone on speaker and started the voice memo app, because that is a habit he formed in 2007 and never lost. Sonny talked for a while about a debt that was not really his fault. Then someone in the room said something to him, low, and Sonny's voice changed. He said, "They want $214,000 by Sunday, and, okay, they said to say, they'll mail you his teeth first, so you know they're serious. Beg nice, Lock." That's what he said to say. Beg nice. Lachlan Pryor said one thing in that entire call, at the very end, in a voice that 4 different people would later describe with the same word. Pleasant. He said, "Sonny, put whoever's standing next to you on." The line went dead. He stood in the yard for 4 minutes after that call ended, and I want to tell you what he did in those 4 minutes, because it is the single most useful thing in this story, for anybody who is ever going to get a phone call like that. He did not call back. He did not run to the truck. He walked to the end of his own driveway and he said out loud, to nobody, in the dark, the 4 things he actually knew. 1. The boy was alive 14 minutes ago. Because a man who has hurt a child does not open with a number. He opens with an apology or a threat about what has already happened. 2. The demand was $214,000, and that is not a kidnapper's number. A kidnapper asks for a round number he invents. 214,000 is an accounting number. It is what somebody is owed, which meant this was not a ransom. It was a collection, and collections have paperwork, and paperwork has people, and people can be found. 3. They had said Sunday. Nobody who intends to hurt a child gives you until Sunday. Sunday meant they had a plan that required the child to be fine. 4. Sonny had been made to read a line. They said to say. He had announced, in the middle of his own threat, that he was reciting 4 facts in 4 minutes, standing at the end of a driveway in Ohio. And what those 4 facts told him is that he had between 8 and 30 hours before the situation degraded, and not 1 minute more, because a plan that requires a 12-year-old to be fine is a plan that has never had a 12-year-old in it. Then he went inside. The conversation with his wife is not mine to reconstruct in detail, and the parts I do have came from her, years later, in a church basement in Zanesville, where she now sometimes talks to other people about it. She said the worst moment of her life was not the phone call. It was watching her husband stand in their kitchen and tell her, in order, calmly, with dates, that he had known since June, and understanding that he had spent 10 weeks trying to find a way to save both of them, her son and her brother, and that the 10 weeks had been the price. She said, "I want to be very clear about something, because people always want me to be angrier at Lachlan than I am. He was slow because of me. He was slow because he knew what taking Sonny away from me would do, and he was trying not to do it. I had spent 25 years teaching that man that my brother was load-bearing. That's on me, and I've made my peace with it." She also said the thing she is best known for saying, which she said in a victim statement at Milton Kessick's sentencing, and which got quoted in 2 newspapers. "My brother did not sell my son. My brother sold a story about my husband for $4,000, and then he found out that stories are not free." At 7:26, Lucinda Pryor did one more thing, and it is easy to miss, and it should not be. She got the folder out of the closet, the award packet, the one Sonny had gone through in 2023, and she put it on the kitchen table in front of her husband, and she said, "If any of this is going to help, use it." He looked at it for a second and pushed it back across the table. He said, "It won't. It's what caused it." There is a version of this story where a man loses his mind in a kitchen, and it is not this one, and the difference is training. At 7:19, Lachlan Pryor went back inside and told his wife the truth. All of it. The credential, the 19 cars, June of last year, the folder in the closet, what he had suspected since April and what he had known since June, and the fact that he had not told her, and why, and that the why had been wrong. Lucinda Pryor sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the dishwasher, and she did not scream and she did not cry, and after about 90 seconds she said, "What do you need from me?" At 7:31 he called the county sheriff's office and asked for Detective Solange Renard, because Renard was county, and the Nickel Bend Police Department towed through Keswick and had for 19 years. He gave her everything in 11 minutes. He was not emotional. He gave her the manufacturer's log dates, Boulanger's name and number, the address of the printing plant, the count of men he had personally observed, the layout of the building, and the recording he had just made. Renard said the correct thing, which was, "Do not go anywhere. We are coming. We will get a warrant and a team. This is what we do." And Lachlan said, "Detective, how long?" She was honest with him. "Warrant, plus a tactical element out of the county. Plus the plant is 300 feet with a truck bay. Realistically, dawn." He said, "They gave me until Sunday, but they've got a 12-year-old in a building with 9 men who did not plan for a 12-year-old. Nobody in that building has thought past tonight. By dawn, one of them will have made a decision." She said, "Mr. Pryor, I need you to hear me say, do not go there." He said, "I hear you saying it." And then he did the thing that is, legally, the whole reason he is a free man. He stayed on the line and he told her, on a recorded non-emergency line, exactly what he was going to do, in order, with times, which door, what he would be carrying, which was nothing, what he would not do, where the boy would be brought out. He asked her to have an ambulance at the Route 60 turnout at 11:50, and to please, please, not let Nickel Bend PD hear any of it on a radio. Renard, who has since been promoted twice, and who does not discuss this case, said, "Say the last part again for the recording." And he said it again. Then he hung up and went to the shop. Here is what Lachlan Pryor took to a building containing 9 men. He took a canvas apron. He took a pin kit and a plug follower. He took 24 5-pin cylinders from stock, already assembled, keyed alike to a single blank he had cut in 2013 and had never given anybody. He took a cordless driver, a 2-pound sledge with the head wrapped in a towel, 4 8-inch carriage bolts, a coil of nylon strapping, a headlamp with a red filter, a roll of aluminum tape, and a fire extinguisher. He took no gun. He owned one. It stayed in the safe. He would say later that the reason was not moral, and it wasn't. It was that a man carrying a gun into a building has decided in advance how the night ends, and he had not decided. He also took the index cards, 11 of them, in a rubber band, with the keying of every exterior door on the Nickel Bend printing plant in his own handwriting, dated the 4th of March 2013. And he made 2 phone calls from the truck. The first was to Bishop Vance, who was already 40 minutes down the road, and it lasted 9 seconds. Lachlan said, "Route 60, the old printing plant, north tree line. Don't come in. If I'm not out by midnight, you call Detective Renard and you tell her exactly what I told you and you go home." Bishop said, "Understood," and then, "Lock." A pause. "Bring the kid out. That's the job. That's the only job." The second call was to Cyril Dunmore, 81 years old, at 9:10 at night. Lachlan said, "Cyril, in 2013, on the printing plant, did we ever do the East Truck Bay man door? There was the sound of an old man getting out of a chair. 4 minutes of silence. Then, we did it in the fall, after the main package. It's a mortise, not the rim. Different keyway. Do you remember the bidding?" And Cyril Dunmore, who had been retired for 14 years and who would be dead of a stroke 18 months later, read him a 6-digit number off a card in his own kitchen, from memory of where he had filed it. That is not a small thing. That, honestly, is the most Nickel Bend thing in this entire story. A man saved his son, partly because another man had kept a card for 12 years about a door nobody had thought about since. Lachlan Pryor got to the tree line at 10:40. He lay in the same wet grass he had lain in on the 19th of June, and for 50 minutes he did nothing at all except watch and count, because the first rule of the job he used to do is that the hostage is not rescued by the entry. The hostage is rescued by the hour you spend before it. He counted 9 men and confirmed it 3 separate ways: by silhouettes in the lit bay, by vehicles, and by cigarette breaks at the West personnel door, which is the door men use when they want to be out of sight of the boss. He found the boy at 11:06, and it took everything he had not to move, because what he saw through a $60 monocular was a small shape sitting on an office chair inside a glassed-in supervisor's booth on the mezzanine at the west end, and the shape was rocking slightly, and there was a man sitting on the stairs below it. Then he did the thing that the 9 men in that building will be explaining to themselves for the rest of their lives. He walked the outside of the building, in the dark, slowly, and one at a time, he changed every lock. 11 exterior doors. 9 of them were locked from the outside, which meant he could work them without ever entering. 2 screws. Pull the cylinder. Drop in one of his own. 2 screws. Done. Between 40 and 90 seconds a door. The 2 that were unlocked, the truck bay man door and the west personnel door, he did differently. He ran a carriage bolt through the hasp on the outside of one, and on the other he waited 11 minutes in a stand of sumac for a man to finish a cigarette and go back inside, and then he changed that cylinder too, and threw it locked. At 11:51, every exterior door of the Nickel Bend printing plant was locked, and there was exactly one key on earth that opened any of them, and it was in the pocket of a canvas apron. The building had one other way out, the truck bay roll-up, which is electric, chain-driven, and controlled by a wall button and a key switch, and Lachlan had installed that key switch too. He did not disable it. That is a detail worth pausing on. He left it working, because the men inside needed to have a way out that he controlled, or they would make one through the boy. At 11:54 he went in through the roof. The Nickel Bend printing plant has a sawtooth roof, which is a 19th century design. A row of triangular ridges, each with a bank of north-facing windows, so a factory floor could be lit by daylight without direct sun on the work. Those window banks are on hinges, because they were built to be opened for ventilation with a pole from the floor, and the hardware on them is 110 years old. And in 2013, Lachlan had told the printing company's facilities manager that the roof lights were a security problem and had been told there was no budget. He went up the fire escape at the east end, walked the valley between 2 sawteeth, opened a window bank with a screwdriver and a great deal of patience, and lowered himself onto the top of a paper storage rack 22 feet above the floor, in the dark, at the east end of a building where all 9 men were at the west end, because that is where the light and the coffee and the boy were. He spent 4 minutes lying flat on that rack listening. What he heard was not a criminal enterprise. What he heard was 9 frightened young men in a building with a 12-year-old, and 2 of them arguing, and one of them saying the same sentence 3 different ways, which was, "This is not what I signed up for." That is when Lachlan Pryor changed his plan. The plan he had come with was, get to the mezzanine, get the boy, go out the truck bay man door with the key nobody else had. It would probably have worked, and it would probably have ended with somebody shot. The plan he switched to was the plan he had actually spent 18 years doing, and it starts from a fact that almost nobody believes until they have seen it. Most of the people holding a hostage are looking for permission to stop. At 12:02 a.m., every light in the Nickel Bend printing plant went out, because Lachlan had found the main panel on his way along the east wall, and it was, of course, in a locked electrical closet, and of course he had the key. Then he pulled a breaker back in, 1 circuit only, the truck bay. So the west end of the building, the 9 men, the coffee, the cars, the mezzanine, went pitch black, and 300 feet away, at the far end, 1 pool of light came on over the closed roll-up door, and a voice came out of the dark in the middle of the building. It was not shouting. Several of the 9 men, in interviews, said the worst part was how conversational it was. It said, "The doors are mine. All 11. I changed them about an hour ago, so whatever's on your keyring is scrap now. Go on and try one." Somebody tried one. 2 of them tried 3. "The roll-up runs off a key switch," the voice said. "I've got that too. Here's the offer, and it doesn't get made twice. Everybody who wants to leave, walk to the light. Hands empty. You'll go out that door, and there's nobody outside to stop you. And I don't know any of your names, and I'm not going to learn them. Anybody standing on that mezzanine when the light goes back on is going to have a very different night." Then he said the sentence that made Bell Roach understand who he was talking to. He said, "I'm the boy's father. I've done this 318 times. Every single one of them, somebody walked out. Be one of those." 6 of the 9 went to the light. They walked 300 feet down a dark factory floor with their hands out, and they stood in a pool of light in front of a closed roll-up door, and after about 90 seconds the door rattled and started to rise, and they ducked under it and ran into the dark of a gravel lot, where a 52-year-old man in a parked truck watched them scatter and did not follow, because that had been the deal. 3 stayed, Bell Roach, and a 26-year-old named Kel Brannigan, and a man named Ludo Marchetti who had the shotgun. And this is the part that got repeated in Nickel Bend for years, in a way that mostly is not accurate. All 9 of them were found broken in that shop by morning. 6 of them were not broken. 6 of them were found at a truck stop in Cambridge at 4 in the morning, 3 of them already having called their mothers, and every single one of the 6 gave a statement, and their statements are the spine of the federal case. 3 of them were broken. Lachlan Pryor was in that building for 19 more minutes, and when the county came through the roll-up at 12:41, Ludo Marchetti had a shattered forearm and a dislocated jaw. Kel Brannigan had 2 broken ribs and was zip-tied with nylon strapping to a hydraulic press, and Bellamy Roach was face down on the concrete with a compound fracture of the right leg and his own belt around his wrists, conscious and shouting. The shotgun was in 3 pieces on the floor 11 feet from anybody. Arlo Pryor was in the supervisor's booth on the mezzanine, uninjured, wrapped in a canvas apron, with his father sitting on the floor of the doorway between him and the stairs, blocking the view, talking to him about the chess tournament in Zanesville. That is what the deputies walked in on. Renard has described it in exactly 1 public sentence, at a sentencing hearing, and the sentence was, "He was telling the child about a chess game, and he did not stop when we came up the stairs." The boy was checked at the hospital and released at 4:10 in the morning. He had a bruise on his upper arm and had not been fed since noon. That is the entire physical injury to Arlo Pryor, and the reason it is the entire injury is that his father spent 50 minutes in wet grass instead of 11 seconds kicking a door. Milton Kessick was asleep in a house on the ridge when it happened, and he stayed asleep, because nobody called him. That detail says everything about what he had built. 9 men in a building with a child, and not one of them thought the boss would want to be woken up about it, because the boss had constructed a business whose entire operating principle was that he never had to know. He found out at 6:50 in the morning, when Detective Solange Renard and 2 agents came up his driveway, and the first thing he said, before anybody had spoken, was, "I want to be clear that I leased that building out." He had a good lawyer and a better story, and for about 9 days it looked like it might hold, because Kessick had genuinely never touched a stolen vehicle in his life, and the lease on the printing plant was real, and every man in the building was on paper as an employee of a company that was not his. 2 things broke him, and neither of them was the fight. The first was the 6 young men who had walked to a light, who had not been arrested at the scene, and who had spent about 4 hours on the drive to Cambridge, realizing exactly how close they had come. Every one of them had been recruited at Kessick's salvage yard. 4 of them had been paid in cash out of a drawer in Kessick's office. 2 of them had, at various points, been personally instructed by him. 6 statements, taken separately over 3 days, that agreed on the parts that mattered and disagreed on the parts you'd expect, which is what truthful statements do. The second was the log. Because here is the thing about the crime Milton Kessick had built. He had done it with a credential, and a credential is not a crowbar. A crowbar leaves a mark on a door. A credential leaves a line in a database, with a timestamp, a VIN, and a licensee number, on a server owned by a car manufacturer that has no interest whatsoever in protecting anybody. 41 vehicles, over 19 months, all attributed to license 411-0973, and Lachlan Pryor, who had spent 11 weeks building the other book, could account for his own physical location, with receipts, for 38 of them. Cassia Boulanger's carrier had already paid out on 22 of those cars. She had spent 5 months quietly assembling the subrogation file. She had, by the time anyone asked her, a spreadsheet that mapped every one of the 41 to a salvage title, a revin, a buyer, and a wire. Kessick pled in March. 22 years, federal, on a conspiracy count that carried the whole enterprise, plus the excise and title fraud, plus a receiving count for the plant. Bellamy Roach went to trial and lost. Kidnapping of a minor is not a charge you plead your way around in Ohio. He got 31 years. He has, from prison, sent Lachlan Pryor 2 letters. The first one was what you'd expect. The second one, 4 years later, was 3 sentences long and asked one question, which was whether the number was real. Lachlan wrote back. He does not discuss what he said. Kel Brannigan and Ludo Marchetti got 18 and 24. Of the 6 who walked to the light, 4 received probation and cooperation credit, 1 served 14 months, and 1, a 19-year-old who had been in the building for 6 days total, was not charged and now runs a hydraulic hose business in Zanesville and has never once given an interview about it. Nobody charged Lachlan Pryor with anything. This surprises people, and it should not. And the reason is the 11 minutes he spent on the phone with Solange Renard before he went. There is a recording of a man telling a detective, in advance, exactly what he intended to do, why waiting until dawn would get a child killed, that he would carry no weapon, and where he would bring the boy out. Everything he did that night matched that recording within about 6 minutes. The prosecutor's office looked at 3 men with serious injuries and a shotgun in 3 pieces, and looked at that recording, and looked at 6 young men who had been let go, and declined. The phrase in the memo was, defense of another, and the conduct was conspicuously restrained given the actor's demonstrated capability. He did lose the license, for 11 months, pending the audit. That nearly finished the shop. What kept the shop alive was that 41 businesses on Front Street, plus a school district, plus a hospital, plus a church, went on paying a retainer to a locksmith who could not legally cut them a key, for 11 months, and not one of them ever said out loud that that was what they were doing. And then there was Sonny. Sonny Vantassel was not in the printing plant that night. He had been sent home at 9, because Bell Roach did not trust him in a room with a decision in it. He was arrested at his duplex at 7 in the morning, on the sofa, with the television on, and he cried, and told the deputies immediately that he had been forced, and gave them 4 names in the first 90 seconds, without anybody asking a question. He got 11 years, which is less than Kel Brannigan, who never touched a child and never sold his own family. And that is how the arithmetic of cooperation works. And Lachlan Pryor has said in public exactly one thing about that sentence, which is, that's the system. It isn't mine to be angry at, but there is one more scene, and it is the one that gives this story its name in that town. At 9:20 in the morning on the 29th of August, before the arrest, Sonny called his brother-in-law. He had heard, by then, some garbled version. 3 men in the hospital, the building full of deputies, and he was in a panic that had gone all the way through fear and out the other side into hysteria. There is a recording of this call too, because Lachlan still had the voice memo running from the night before. It has been played in a courtroom. Sonny is screaming. Not words at first. Then, what are you? What are you? And Lachlan Pryor, who had been awake for 28 hours, who had carried his son out of a building at midnight, who had a wife sitting 11 feet away, said this, and you can hear on the recording that he says it very slowly, because he wanted it understood. 318. That's what the number is. It's how many people I brought out. It was never what you thought it was, Sonny. You told a room full of dangerous men that I was a killer, and they believed you, and that's why they thought a child was a reasonable thing to take. A pause. Sonny saying something unintelligible. You'll be 319, Lachlan said. Open your door. Deputies are 11 minutes out, and if you run, they'll shoot you. And my wife will spend the rest of her life knowing her brother died running. So sit down, open the door, and put your hands where they can see them. That's it. That's all 319 is. And that is how a threat that this whole town retold for years as a death sentence was, on the actual recording, a man talking his wife's brother into surviving his own arrest. Sonny opened the door. The last thing, and then I'll get out of the way. Lucinda Pryor did not visit her brother in prison for the first 2 years. In the 3rd year she started, once a quarter, and she has never once asked her husband to come, and he has never once asked her not to go. She has said, to one friend, that she is not visiting Sonny to forgive him. She is visiting so that she can stop rehearsing what she would say, and that it is working, slowly. Arlo Pryor is 19 now. He is at Ohio State studying, of all things, marine biology, which his father finds funny in a way he cannot explain to anybody. He did 4 years of therapy. He does not like small rooms with glass walls and probably never will. He has told exactly 2 people what his father said to him in that supervisor's booth for 19 minutes while 3 men were on the floor below, and neither of them will repeat it, and I respect that enough not to invent it. And on the wall of Pryor Lock and Safe, next to the state license that came back in July of the following year, there is a framed index card. It is one of 11. It is the card for the East Truck Bay man door, in Cyril Dunmore's handwriting, dated the 4th of November, 2013. The shop is still there. The brass key over the door got repainted on schedule. I want to talk about the word rekey, because it is the only thing I have to give you out of this. In the trade, when a lock has been compromised, a key went missing, an employee left badly, somebody got in, you do not usually replace the lock. The lock is fine. The lock is a good piece of steel that will outlive you. What you do is take the cylinder apart and change the little stack of pins inside so that the mechanism now answers to a different key. Same door, same hardware, same building. It just stops obeying the person it used to obey. That is not a metaphor I'm reaching for. That is the literal thing Lachlan Pryor did to 11 doors in the dark, and it is also, exactly, the thing he did to a family. And the reason it worked in both cases is the same. He did not tear anything down. He changed what it answered to. And here is the practical part. Because I promised you educational value and I'm not going to hand you a poem instead. Every one of us is running a set of keys we have never audited. Not metaphorical ones, real ones. Who has a copy of your house key? Who is on your bank account as a signer from 2014? Whose name is still on the utility, the storage unit, the emergency contact card at your kid's school, the authorized to pick up list at the daycare? Which former employee still has your alarm code? Which relative you have been carrying for 19 years knows exactly where you keep the folder you never talk about? None of those things are betrayals. All of them are keys. And a key that you have not thought about in 6 years is not a small thing. It is an entire, functioning, unmonitored piece of access to your life, sitting in the pocket of somebody who has changed since you handed it over. Lachlan Pryor's mistake was not that he trusted his wife's brother. His mistake was that he had a fireproof cabinet with the whole town in it, and a certificate on the wall, and an $11,000 machine under the bench, and a man who resented him standing in that room alone for one afternoon in June. And he never once did to his own shop what he had done for 41 businesses on Front Street. So go do the boring thing this week. Sit down for 20 minutes and write the list. Every key, every code, every login, every name still attached to something of yours. Then rekey one of them. Just one. The oldest one. Same door. Same life. It just stops answering to somebody who isn't there anymore.